It's Wednesday Addams. I see you're trying to distract yourself from your own banal thoughts. Let me help. Here's a recording thing made of my latest root canal.
Wednesday Season 2 is now playing, only on Netflix.
Beau, if you were going to point out one law that's the underlying problem for everything that's going wrong on the internet, what would it be?
Section 230. 1996, Section 230. It was the thing that protected all platforms online from being held responsible for stuff people said on their platform. So like in the beginning, it would be like a message board and someone would be like, here's how you build a bomb. They were protected by 230.
I think the question here is, should the law change? And more importantly, can it be changed? And I guess what happens if we don't?
Well, if you want to know what happens when we don't, just turn your computer on or look at your smartphone. That's what happens.
Today, we're joined by Gretchen Peters. She's the co-founder and executive director of the Alliance to Counter Crime Online, and an expert who's been fighting against the criminal use of social media for a very long time. Welcome to What the Hack, the true cybercrime podcast. I'm Adam Levin.
I'm Beau Friedlander.
And I'm Travis Taylor.
Gretchen Peters, welcome to What the Hack. Where are you coming to us from?
I am in Washington, D.C.
And you are the leader of the Alliance to Counter Crime Online, correct?
I am the executive director and one of the co-founders of ACCO. We started off as a group of people who researched organized crime, and we have grown to include a number of NGOs that focus on issues related to organized crime and exploitation online, and to include a number of bereaved family groups.
When you say organized crime, let's define our terms. I think of The Sopranos. It's probably a bit more complicated than that.
Organized crime simply means a crime or illicit activity that occurs more than once and is managed by more than one person. So it can be a scam or a fraud, an organized crime network like the fictional Sopranos, or a real organized crime network like the Sinaloa cartel. Effectively, it is anything that is organized, planned, repetitive, and that is not a crime of passion. We focus on serious organized crimes. So we focus on issues like the illegal sale of products, human trafficking, the spread of child sex abuse content.
So transnational crime, correct?
Transnational crime, certainly. That was actually how I came into this, that I had been working on. Well, let me give you a very brief bio. I'll try to give you the Father Guido Sarducci version of my bio. I was an investigative journalist for 18 years and worked in a lot of places that had a lot of crime and corruption. And I covered a lot of different aspects of this issue. Eventually ended up writing a book about the Taliban and the heroin trade in Afghanistan. That experience led me to consulting governments on organized crime issues, and I got into working more in the natural resources space. I worked for the U.S. government while as a consultant related to Afghanistan and Pakistan, and I eventually got sick of drug traffickers and terrorists and started focusing more on wildlife crime, timber crime, human trafficking, things that I thought should be national security priorities. And it was then doing that work that we discovered the extent to which a lot of organized crime issues, in particular, got our start tracking the illegal elephant ivory trade. To our surprise, we found that the ivory trade at the retail level had moved online. And had you asked me in 2015 when we were doing this work, where do you buy elephant ivory online? I would have said, probably the dark web, the Silk Road, one of these dark web marketplaces. But in fact, it was on Facebook.
You've gone from investigating the Taliban's heroin trade to uncovering wildlife crime and consulting for governments. In all these cases, you've seen the patterns of corruption and organized crime firsthand. But you've also pointed out something surprising. It's not the big players getting caught. What did your work reveal about who really controls these networks, and why are they so difficult to bring to justice?
Well, I've never worked as a law enforcement person, but I've worked as a consultant to law enforcement and to governments, help them devise policies and strategies that will reduce harm, not be as devastating to communities. I worked as a journalist covering places like Mexico and Central America, Afghanistan and Pakistan. I worked in Southeast Asia, worked in the Balkans. A lot of places that were just getting chewed up by organized crime and corruption, and where I came to believe that the reason these regions were never able to reach stability is that there was an elite group of illicit actors, drug traffickers, human traffickers, people who exploited the environment, that had often captured the state at very high levels, corrupted the customs department, the police forces, and the banks, and could move money, drugs at massive, massive scale. And part of my conclusion from a lot of reporting and research was that most counter-crime policies in the United States, as well as everywhere else, go after the sort of low-level actors in the supply chain. Farmers growing drugs, poachers killing animals, guys selling dime bags on street corners. Those are the people that get arrested. But the people who control the supply chain almost never get caught. And there's many of them, and you can have much more impact. But also, you're not harming the communities that are the most harmed by these criminal supply chains. Just to give you an example, I spent years interviewing farmers in Afghanistan. Poppy farmers in Afghanistan, similar to farmers in Colombia and Mexico, will tell you they grow drugs because their lives depend on it. And they are not exaggerating.
Well, their lives depend on it, and often their lives are threatened if they don't do it.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Their lives are threatened. Nobody else comes to buy their stuff.
And nobody's coming there to protect them and say, hey, don't do it, and we'll make sure you're okay. Sounds like you repurposed your journalism cred to do something with your skills as a journalist. Is that kind of right?
Yeah, that's true. I realized there was a market for somebody who understood. I'd kind of grown up around criminal supply chains and learned about them inductively in all these countries. I started to realize how few people in policy positions really understood. I have a speech I give about how an illicit supply chain is like that old line about Gilda Radner doing the same thing as Fred Astaire, only backwards and in heels. Crime group, it has all of the same roles and functions as any normal production, Toyota or Nike. They're producing goods, they're moving them through a transnational sphere of operations, they're financing activities, they have all the same roles and functions, but nobody thinks about it. We only go after organized crime where it's visible. And usually where it's visible is where the crime networks are the most resilient.
You said this is happening in the open on social media? How is it possible that it's not illegal for a drug dealer to be working on Facebook or TikTok, or for a child sex abuse image seller or trader to do the same? How is it possible that the algorithm knows exactly what's happening, almost like it's protected, is it?
It is. So I want to clarify that child sex abuse content is not 230 protected any longer.
So tell me about it. Section 230. Let's first say, what is Section 230?
So Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act was adopted in 1996. It is a law that is often described by the tech industry as a law that protects free speech. In fact, it is a law about liability. And it basically says that any user-generated content that is uploaded to the internet shall be considered protected free speech, and that the hosts of that information should not be considered a publisher or a distributor of the information. If you're the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and you carry a classified ad for Chapo Guzman or Tony Soprano selling drugs, you'll be prosecuted. But online, that same information is defined as protected free speech. This is the core of our fight, to say we can and should define in our laws the difference between illicit and exploitative conduct and free expression. None of it changed the First Amendment. We wouldn't be here today without the First Amendment. It's massively important. But selling a kid for sex, selling fentanyl pills, selling endangered species, that's not free expression. Those are felonies.
Can you explain to us, though, how can child sex abuse content ever have been protected?
So it was, I believe, the laws that carve out any sort of obscenity pertaining to children were passed very soon after. They realized, and I forget exactly when it was passed, but that one came very quickly. Because as you can imagine, once the internet began, it was immediately overrun with porn. However, the law is still incomplete, in my view, in terms of the protections against child sex abuse content, because the current law says that platforms or tech companies must report any incidents of CSAM, child sex abuse material, once they become aware of it. And what that does is incentivize them not to look for it.
Once they become aware of it.
Once they become aware of it. And so I personally believe the law should be changed to say that they must look for it and remove it, obviously, but report what they find.
Before the break, we learned how platforms like Facebook and TikTok have become hubs for organized crime, amplifying everything from illegal wildlife trade to human trafficking. And we touched on how Section 230 is shielding these platforms from accountability.
I mean, Section 230 is still really weird to me, like an old car, an old three-wheeled car.
Yeah, I mean, its defenders would say it was designed to protect free speech and innovation by not holding platforms responsible for everything users post. But in 1996, the internet was nothing at all like it is now.
The law's incomplete. The real question, does Section 230 protect companies more than people? And if so, what are the consequences of that?
I'll tell you what the problem is at its core, in my view. Our laws in general should be written to protect the most vulnerable constituencies among us, and that is not tech billionaires. I think that at the core of this issue is that our laws and our policies should be written to protect the most vulnerable constituencies among us. That includes children, elderly, LGBT communities. And right now, our laws are written to protect tech billionaires, and that's inexcusable.
When Section 230 was passed, that was in 1996. And I think most folks at that point were on dial-up, maybe connecting to the internet through AOL.
Yeah, only about 20 million people were using the internet at the time.
But for the most part, those are things like message boards and the like. And it makes a lot of sense that they would not have been able to have monitored very closely everything that was being posted. But since then, you mentioned the rise of algorithms. How has that changed the nature of content on the internet since then?
Well, you've narrowed in on exactly the issue, right? Back in 1996, when Section 230 was passed and the internet was in its infancy, most people connected to the internet through dial-up. Smartphones hadn't been invented. Social media hadn't been invented. Mark Zuckerberg was 12 years old. Evan Spiegel, who now runs Snapchat, was just 6 years old. So this is like another lifetime. Most tech platforms were either message boards or email servers. And so effectively, what Section 230, these new technologies were like a form of telephones. If you and I were to get on the phone and do a drug deal, you can't say that's Verizon's or T-Mobile's fault. They're just carrying information. But it's a different story when you post something to X or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok and the algorithms spread it to millions of other people.
So these platforms are no longer just carrying the posts or whatever people share on social media. Algorithms are actually deciding what tweets will get a little more attention or what photo might show up on my Discover page.
Yes. When they detect that it's going viral or that it has heavy engagement and they push it out to more people, they are, in fact, distributing the information to far more people than newspapers ever did. So I think they should be considered distributors of information and regulated differently. This is not a speech issue. This is an issue of distribution and an issue of liability for harms that are caused by pushing information out.
Well, not only that, but we see that right now, more people are getting their news through the platforms than they are getting their news from legitimate news organizations that have been around forever.
There was a great article the other day in the Wall Street Journal about a few influencers on TikTok that do news, reach more people than NBC and CBS and CNN. That's not happening by accident. That's happening because the algorithms push them out. Those people have a free speech right to say what they say on those, but they don't have a right under the First Amendment to be distributed. I can write an op-ed every single day and send it to the Wall Street Journal. They are under no obligation to publish it.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that we see nowadays is the way that social media works, this idea of unanticipated consequences when it comes to our on-life digital lives is paramount. As a writer and as a person in publishing, and you were in journalism, our contracts often would try to think about rights that might come in play later on. Like maybe there'd be a movie, maybe there'd be a book, maybe there'd be this, maybe there'd be that. But when it came to ebooks back when I was a kid, they were like, maybe you'll do something electronic with this. And now, of course, there's a gazillion things you can do with it. And had they been able to anticipate meme culture, there'd be authors making money off of quotes right now. But it wasn't anticipated. Now, the internet has been driven by capitalism 100% all the way. And as a result, if somebody slides into your comments on a post and they say something, it's abjectly wrong. It is the guy flying a Nazi flag at the Trump rally who nobody says don't fly that flag. Like, where do you say you can't do this? Well, in our country, and thanks to 230 and the First Amendment to some extent, there is this shadow area because the law didn't anticipate the internet becoming the 1,000-armed octopus that it is today.
First of all, I want to say at ACCO, we don't work on speech issues so much, but I want to say that I went back and started looking at some of the original writings that the Founding Fathers did about the First Amendment and the rights of free speech. I found something Thomas Jefferson wrote in his original 1777 bill for establish the rights to religious freedom and free speech in Virginia. He wrote, "Freedom of conscience is a fundamental right, but government can regulate overt acts against peace and good order, but lacks all power to intrude on the field of opinion." Even back then, they knew that if somebody was doing or saying something that harmed others, those are not protected activities under the First Amendment. Decades, if not centuries, of jurisprudence backing this up. Yet somehow in the digital age, that seems to have gotten all confused for a lot of people. What's not confusing to vast majority of American people across the political spectrum is that selling children for sex online is not protected free expression. Selling fentanyl tablets online is not protected free expression. Selling endangered animals online is not protected free expression. Scamming people, stealing other people's identity to scam other people, expressing your political right to free speech. You're committing a crime. You're defrauding people. These are frauds and forgeries and exploitative activities. Bullying is not protected by the First Amendment.
So we agree on all of those things.
And most Americans agree.
Why are the platforms letting it happen?
That is an excellent question. One of the classic stories in corporate responsibility is the story of Johnson & Johnson and Tylenol.
Cyanide-contaminated Tylenol has been responsible for 3 deaths in the Arlington Heights area. Do not take Tylenol until further notice.
Arlington Heights police demonstrated tonight how they have been warning residents throughout the day.
Somebody, I think it was in 1982, put arsenic into Tylenol tablets. And Johnson & Johnson immediately recalled 31 million bottles of Tylenol, took the product off the market, took a huge hit.
And then in Arlington Heights, the deaths of 2 brothers and the critical illness of one of their wives. Now tonight, a 4th death in the DuPage County town of Winfield has been linked to the altered medicine. And in Downers Grove, still another death suspected of being cyanide poisoning. The bottles were labeled extra-strength Tylenol, 50 capsule size, lot number MC2880, expiration date April 1987. If you have a Tylenol bottle marked that way, destroy it.
At the present time, I think that would be a safe policy until further investigation, until we can perhaps determine where the contamination took place. If it were me,
They immediately developed the tamper-proof seals for their bottles. They set up information lines so people could call in with concerns. They really went overboard. The tech industry has not done anything responsible at responding to the harms caused on their platform or making an effort to clean them up. Now, I've spent years flipping insiders inside Meta, inside Snapchat, inside other tech companies, and bringing them to authorities to talk about what's going on inside. Some of the most interesting folks I've talked to from Meta's security department effectively say that they lost control of that platform within a couple years of it being set up. The whole structure of Facebook and the fact that really with most of the social media platforms, you can set it up with just a Yahoo address or a Gmail address. It doesn't have to be a real person attached. It means that they have no idea. They've lost control over they've lost the capacity to clean up the large amount of bad actors they have in their platforms. I don't know if they'll ever be able to get the genie back in the bottle.
But is that by design, or is that just because it got beyond them?
A sort of libertarian design that anybody should be able to set up an account and put whatever they want up there.
One of the big problems we have is the algorithms, which you've been talking about. So when you look at these algorithms and you see what they're doing, it's like, how do they aid criminals?
The platforms enable criminals in multiple ways. The algorithms help spread content to people they don't know about. They will grow criminal markets. In most of the studies we do, the recommendation tools help us grow our knowledge by about 30% per month. At least 30% of the new content recommended to us would come from the algorithms, not from our own manual searching. In addition, many of the platforms have internal payment systems. The platforms have translation tools, allow illicit actors to communicate with people around the world when they couldn't do so before. They also have a platform like Facebook has groups, so you can invite people into these walled gardens that others can't see what's going on. Discord, Telegram, and Reddit offer groups that are private. There's no regulation or rules on the platform that the admins of those groups go through any higher level of scrutiny than anybody else. So there's all sorts of ways in which the platforms really aid and abet all sorts of illicit activity.
It's like a one-stop turnkey operation for any criminal organization.
It's not so much that the algorithms are aiding and abetting crime, it's that the algorithms are like really killer surf. And everybody's getting out before they get in the riverboat up to see Colonel Kurtz to do a little surfing while there's napalm being showered down on them. So those algorithms are basically just getting surfed by these criminals.
The platforms are enabling illicit actors of all stripes and massively amplifying their capacity to predate people, organize amongst themselves, market their goods to a wider range of people, groom potential victims. They offer all sorts of opportunities. Plus, the platforms encourage people to put an immense amount of information about themselves out there. That is another vulnerability. A lot of people have put really dangerous amount of information about themselves.
But now the question is, what's the answer?
At ACCO, we would like to see Section 230 sunset. That does not mean repealed. That means give it a sell-by date and put the onus on Congress to replace it with something that defines the difference between free expression and illicit and exploitative conduct. Also gives people harmed online a path to justice, because right now lawsuits that people have tried to file against big tech get thrown out on 230 grounds. And there have been basically 2 decades of kind of crappy precedent set. And we are now at a point when there's so much harm and there's so many bereaved family groups and harmed constituencies that I think finally Congress is starting to realize that they're going to have to do something about this.
So can Section 230 be reformed to stop this damage while still keeping the internet open?
And if platforms like Facebook and TikTok are found to be amplifying illegal content, what does that mean for their future? Is there a point where we just say, shut it all down? After the break, we'll find out.
Before the break, we were discussing the massive impact Section 230 has had on keeping social media platforms free from liability for illegal activity. You painted a pretty bleak picture of how unchecked algorithms are accelerating harm. Now, imagine if a car company could release products without worrying about the damage they cause, just like these platforms do. I mean, it's unthinkable, right?
Imagine having a product that you could roll out on the market and never have to worry about what harm it caused. Imagine if Boeing could put planes in the air, Toyota could put cars out and say, well, sometimes these are going to crash, sometimes people are going to die, but we'll figure that out later. It's unimaginable in any other industry. It's almost ridiculous that the law exists. But the tech industry has done an absolutely marvelous job convincing people that this is a free speech issue.
So with what you're saying in terms of reforming Section 230, if say Facebook were to be found to obviously be, amplifying illegal content, would the solution there just be shut Facebook down?
If you follow this logically, it could mean that social media is basically done.
I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. I think that certain platforms, in particular Meta platforms and probably Snapchat, would struggle under a duty of care unless they fundamentally changed the way they're structured and the way they operate. I think they'd make a lot less money. There's no reason why social media can't exist in a safe environment, that there can't be safe models of social media. I can tell you that I was a very active user of Facebook for a while and still am on Twitter. I liked communicating with my friends and trading pictures of their families or their trips or some cool meal that they had. I liked communicating with, as I said, I worked all over the world. I liked seeing what was happening with my friends in Pakistan and my friends in Cambodia and having a way to check in. But what I didn't like was the spread of viral misinformation, the predators that were on there. I eventually left the platform because I just thought it was becoming a cesspit.
So you're really talking about kind of a compliance issue, right? I mean, these platforms, they're going to hate the duty of care, just like, for instance, the financial industry hates Dodd-Frank.
Sure. It's very interesting. As somebody who has studied and worked on money laundering, many of the arguments the tech industry is making are the same arguments that the financial community was making in the 80s before the Bank Secrecy Act and all the laws that now regulate the financial industry existed. Banks, in many ways, are very comparable to tech platforms, privately owned for-profit enterprises that cater to thousands, tens of thousands, even millions of customers who have a reasonable expectation and right to privacy of their activities in the bank. And yet the banks now have to try to make sure that scammers, money launderers, and drug dealers aren't in their systems.
Money doesn't know where it came from. But the social platforms and the messaging platforms do know where this stuff is coming from. And it could very easily, with the duty of care law, turn people over who deserve to be turned over to law enforcement.
Yeah, they would have to put a lot more investment into their trust and safety teams. I also think that one of the things that we really have to look at and drill down on is the scale of harm that is being caused. As I said, we got into this because of the issue of the illegal wildlife trade. The number of species that are going into population collapse after they start trending on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, incredible and heartbreaking. There's things I didn't even know were a thing, like the illegal tarantula trade. The rate with which child sex abuse content now spreads and has completely overwhelmed the tip lines and the law enforcement groups that fight this problem is probably the most heartbreaking thing of all. They've gotten to the point in the United States where they only have the resources to go out and rescue kids who they find are being exploited online who are pre-verbal. That means toddlers and below.
I just reached my capacity. Can we talk about, Adam, how about for the rest of this episode, we talk about the best way to maintain a fish tank?
There's that baby hippo out there.
Baby hippos?
Sorry.
I'll go with baby hippos, or also Play-Doh. Those are the topics. Are you with us, Gretchen? I mean, it's so dark. It is so dark.
I think about walking away from it all the time. Some of my members have had to drop out of researching this issue because real PTSD is caused when you feel like you can't address a problem, you can't fix a problem. A lot of us who've been working in this for a while really struggle with the unbelievable level of harm that is happening to the most vulnerable constituencies and the incredible lack of morality we experience from the tech industry. As terrifying as it is to look into all of this bad stuff, it is equally terrifying to watch the slow pace with which our Congress has moved to regulate these technologies. We are now cusp of a whole new era of deep fakes, AI-generated stuff, and we haven't even regulated the last set of digital technologies.
Let's try to move us, in a direction where, how people can help and what Congress is doing. For example, we recently did an episode with Senators Blumenthal and Blackburn about COSA, which the Kids Online Safety Act, which did pass the Senate 91-3, which heaven knows what's going to happen in the House because they're a little bit more amenable to the pressures of the tech industry. And with COSA, we did see something interesting with Instagram, where all of a sudden, as COSA passed the Senate, Instagram suddenly has initiated these new protections for younger people, which is just, the timing is fascinating. We also have Senator Warren's bill with Lindsey Graham called the Digital Consumer Protection Commission Act, which is starting to make its way through Congress. And both of these laws do talk about the duty to care, and they talk about the things that platforms can do. They even were talking about the fact that with the DCPCA, that platforms would have to be licensed, and that they could lose their license if there were too many violations of the different protections that we're trying to be.
Exactly. There's some proposals that would say they would lose their 230 protections if they fail to enforce their own community standards, which you could argue most of the big platforms are doing. They all have community standards that are pretty good. They just don't actually manage to enforce them.
Is there hope? It seems like Congress is starting to move.
I wouldn't be doing this if I weren't hopeful that we didn't have a shot at getting there eventually. Europe and the UK have already passed landmark legislation. Canada and Australia are working on it. I listened to your excellent interview with Blumenthal and Blackburn. They're pushing for it. The Energy and Commerce team on the House side is pushing for this as well. COSA did remarkably well in the Senate. COSA is a law for kids. There's a lot of other vulnerable communities, in particular, older Americans need to be addressed as well. I would say that the legal reforms go beyond just regulating the platforms. I believe in an age of catfishing and deepfake technologies, there's also a need to update our outdated laws on forgeries and impersonation. And I think we should also consider giving Americans the right to be forgotten, as Europeans already enjoy. Who doesn't have a kid with an embarrassing college night out they wish they didn't post on Instagram or something like that? I think as long as it's not criminal activity, people should be allowed to delete that content and get rid of it forever. But most of all, there is a gigantic regulatory failure. And I like to use the example of the Alaska airline flight in January of this year that door blew out midair just minutes into the flight. Nobody was sucked out of the fuselage. Plane was able to land safely. But within 24 hours of that mishap, U.S. federal regulators had swung into action to protect the American people. The FAA grounded 171 of the 737-9 MAXs, halted further production of the plane, and demanded that within a month, Boeing provide a safety plan. They have continued to work with them to make sure that safety plan is implemented. Just to give an example, in the fentanyl space, we're losing about 22 teenagers every week to fentanyl poisoning. And that's effectively crashing a Boeing 737 MAX into a mountainside every 10 weeks full of teenagers, right? Data shows that most kids are connecting with dealers on Instagram and Snapchat. Why are those still in the air? Why haven't regulators said, we're taking you off the air until you figure out a way to fix this? Well, give us a plan, and then you can put your platforms back on the internet. That might sound extreme, but you go back to the Tylenol example. Johnson & Johnson took those steps of its own volition. In the Boeing example, the government stepped in to protect the American people's safety. Where are regulators in this? Where is the moral compass of our corporate leaders?
So for our listeners who are concerned about these issues, what are some concrete steps that they can take to protect themselves and their families online?
For one thing, I would advise parents, if your kid wants to get an account on Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, or some new platform, set up an account as if you're a kid that's the same age as your kid on that platform and use it for a week before you let your child on it. Have a look at what it's like, because I can guarantee you would most parents would not let their children on Instagram or Snapchat. I've spent the summer doing research for the European Commission in Europe, pretending to be a teenager in multiple different European countries on Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook. I hadn't done it for a few years because I run the organization. I normally do more policy stuff than research. I was truly shocked, especially by the depressive content, but also by the violent content. Every single boy we set up was being approached by cam girls wanting money and sextortion issues within 24, 48 hours. I was shocked how prevalent that was. Truly thought nothing could shock me in this space anymore, but I was really, really surprised. So that's one thing I would advise parents on. Lock your kids. Everybody should lock their profiles down. Don't friend people you meet online. If you meet people in real life, or if you meet somebody online, say through a dating app, verify that they're real as soon as you can. Meet them in person. 2 months ago, I would say do a video call, but there's now deepfake technologies that run live over FaceTime and WhatsApp video. So you really do need to verify that somebody's a real person. There's a whole set of steps that our friends who fight romance scams teach people to look for, the red flags. Somebody can do a reverse image search if you meet somebody, but also other safety issues. People put so much information about themselves online, relationship status, their age, their location, they turn on their location settings. All of that stuff makes you more vulnerable to predators, especially if it's children. Children ought to have their devices locked down as hard as you can lock them down.
Gretchen, you guys are doing such important work, but it sounds like you're up against some pretty powerful folks. Can you talk about the challenges you face when it comes to funding and support? Especially when you're up against tech giants that are spending billions of dollars to lobby Congress. How can listeners help?
I would like to talk about just how little funding there is for the kind of work that we do. Most of the organizations, most of our members are either entirely or almost entirely unfunded. We are up against the richest companies in the history of the United States. Many of these platforms spend more every single week lobbying Congress than our entire annual budgets. So the best thing for us that your listeners can do if they like what we're doing is to go on our website, counteringcrime.org, click the donate button and send us some money. We won't take money from corporations. We mostly get our funding from small family foundations. Most of us do most of our work as volunteers because we have so little funding, and we really need to change that in order to be able to devote the energy that this needs. Governments have been very slow to catch up to the scale of the crisis. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why there's so little government funding to help NGOs that are fighting the fentanyl crisis, the teen suicide crisis, the spread of child sex abuse content. The numbers are just off the charts. Also, the scamming and catfish issue. I mean, it is by far the fastest growing form of crime in the United States and around the world. And yet, foundations that are even working in the space to counter harms on tech are generally working around democracy and speech issues. Our little world of public safety and exploitation and harm is like the bastard child of the tech space. And so we're really trying to soup up our fundraising and to get more people aware of the important work we are doing and our members are doing to file strategic litigation against tech companies. We're suing Snapchat, Meta. One of our members is suing YouTube. We are supporting multiple federal investigations. We're supporting regulators in the UK and the EU. We're putting out reports all the time showing how criminal actors and illicit actors and predators are weaponizing these platforms, and we're advocating in Congress.
Well, Gretchen, we can't thank you enough for your insights, for the time you spend today, and for your explanation of Section 230, which for a lot of people is a real mystery.
It's about liability. It's not about free speech. That's the key issue to remember with 230. No one's trying to change the First Amendment. We're just trying to make the platforms responsible to keep people safe on their premises, just like any brick and mortar business has to keep you safe when you're at premises.
Well, that's like Senator Blumenthal and Senator Blackburn said that COSA, it's about a defective product. It's not about the First Amendment.
Exactly.
Again, thank you so much. And
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you guys for the great reporting you're doing every week on What the Heck.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's time for our tinfoil swan.
Our paranoid takeaway to help keep you safe on and offline.
So it's almost time for elections here in the US, which means it's time to talk about deepfakes in elections, which is kind of a match made in hell.
Okay. Well, I mean, deepfakes are already all over the place online. There are ways to make it look like you're somebody else on Zoom. California just tried to stop AI-generated election deepfakes, by forcing social media platforms to, quote unquote, take action. But come on, blocks, somehow otherwise impeded. It's all out there, and the problem isn't going to go away. The technology's out there now. The pig is out of the poke.
The toothpaste is out of the tube. The real issue? Well, these AI tools are being used to make fake videos so realistic they can actually alter how you vote. It's not about banning AI, it's about knowing how to spot it when it's being used against you.
Well, the tricky thing here is that deepfakes don't really need to be perfect. They just need to make you question what's real. So if you see a candidate saying something shocking, of which that happens with some frequency, you wonder for just a second, and then that doubt lingers, even after it's debunked. By the time the truth catches up, the damage has already been done.
Yeah, and also just don't assume that you're going to be able to spot what it is. It's not a parody or whatever. These are very sophisticated programs, and you will not be able to tell that you're looking at something that is completely bogus. And the platforms are doing, well, at the risk of being sued by them, I feel really safe saying this, they're doing nothing.
Exactly. The point is, these deepfake laws, whether they're signed or they're not, whether they're blocked or enforced, they can't fully protect us. And we're going into this election with AI evolving faster than we can regulate it. Social media companies might try to label or block this content, but there's absolutely no guarantee they're going to catch everything.
Right.
Or even that they'll try. So what can you do? I mean, you can't really rely on the law or social media to catch every deepfake, or even most of them. But you can protect yourself from falling for it and help others to do the same.
So here are some tips to fight disinformation and spot deepfakes. Number 1, look for glitches or irregularities. Now, deepfakes often have subtle visual errors. Things like blinking that looks unnatural, weird lighting, or mouths that don't quite match the audio. Remember those old dubbed Japanese movies where their mouth was moving, but the words were coming out at a far different pace? My favorite was, of course, Rodan the Flying Monster, but hey, it's me.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I was a Godzilla fan.
Yeah. So you can look for these glitches, but I personally am not very good at seeing them. I've done the tests, and I am a solid D student when it comes to spotting the fake. Another thing you can do is check the source of the information that you are consuming. If it seems a little surprising to you, or even maybe nuts, there is a way to find out if it's true, and that is Google it. Look and Google it, do a news search, do something like that. You need to do that not just one place, right? So if you're like, well, is it true that the Cookie Monster was a drug dealer? You need to then go and see, like, well, it says that on all the news you can abuse .ru, but does it say it anywhere else? That's what you need to do. I can't believe it.
Yeah, and by the same token, you should use a reverse image lookup and video search tools. Like Google has a reverse image search that helps to verify if something's actually real or if it's popped up in other news outlets. And yeah, just do that just to check to see if something's legitimate, if it seems really shocking.
And then finally talk to your friends and family who've fallen for a fake. Okay, this is the tricky one. Whether someone's convinced by a deepfake, it's tempting to argue. But instead, ask questions like, where did you find that video? And engage them with curiosity, not confrontation, to help them think critically.
Critically. I think that's a good idea. But even if these AI-generated fakes are taken down, Adam, the damage has been done. You know how you know? Because I talked to my friend, I'm not going to say a real name, Herman. And I'm not going to say where I saw him, so I'll say the pizza parlor. Not that pizza parlor. Anyway, and...
So the not Herman from the not pizza parlor.
Correct. The die is already cast. Herman already thinks that what he saw was real, and I'm not going to talk him out of it.
I mean, at the end of the day, the fight against deepfakes and disinformation is the proverbial boulder going up the hill. But you just need to make sure you keep your eyes and your mind opened, because the next deepfake video you see might actually be the one that convinces you.
And that's our tinfoil swan.
What the Heck with Adam Levin is a production of Loud Tree Media. You can find us online at adamlevin.com and on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Adam K. Levin.
Behind every great meal is a person with a story to tell. Hear them on Culinary Characters Unlocked, the podcast that reveals the lives behind the food. Hosted by me, David Page, Emmy Award-winning journalist and creator of Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, as I talk with everyone from culinary legends to mom-and-pop standouts about the creativity, grit, and passion that shape the food we love. Follow Culinary Characters Unlocked on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Behind every empire are the people history tried to forget. Lost Roman Heroes tells the stories of the remarkable characters who shaped Rome from its mythical beginnings to its final fall.
Each episode blends armchair storytelling, sharp historical insight, and a bit of humor to bring these lost figures to life. From generals to scientists, from rebels to empresses, from priests to politicians, these lost Roman heroes have one thing in common.
They stood up for civilization when the bad guys threatened, and in doing so, they changed the course of human history. If you're into history that's vivid, surprising, and deeply human, this show's for you.